Hello, Mike Panaki here with Network Protocol Specialists, and I am excited to be joining Chris Greer and Tony Fortunato on this discussion of becoming an expert network problem solver. So over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with both Tony and Chris, and so it's always fun to get together with them for presentations like this and talk about things that we've run into, how we approach things. And I guess I have to say that that's been one of the things that I've really enjoyed over the years, is just seeing how different people approach problems. We all approach it differently, but I would say that Tony and Chris would probably agree that we have those things that we all do that have led to our success. And I mean, two very, very successful people when it comes to both troubleshooting and creating content about troubleshooting. And I think that's a real important one here too, is that Tony writes articles like crazy. Chris has, you just hit over 50,000 subscribers on your YouTube channel, Chris? So
yeah, just hit 50,000, which is exciting.
Whoa,
yeah,
nice.
Getting people information about how to do troubleshooting. So do you guys want to introduce yourself, say something about yourselves?
Go for it, Tony.
All right, Tony Fortunato from the technology firm. Been doing this since '89, troubleshooting, training, sharing the information, and trying to set up some kind of informal community of people to just brainstorm with when I'm stuck.
Awesome. I'll follow that up with, I'm Chris Greer. The company I work for is Packet Pioneer. I also, like Mike said, I try to share what I learn as I'm out there troubleshooting, doing Wireshark captures, also do Wireshark training. I gotta say, I sometimes have a bit of an imposter syndrome sitting around these two, because they both had a huge hand early on in my career in helping to teach me everything that I share. So I appreciate being here with these two guys.
Don't blame me.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, we're not going to have a lot of slides in this, but I am just going to bring up the agenda, and then we'll have a few title slides in the middle. But in this panel discussion, what we're going to do is we're going to be going through knowing where to start your process. And I think that's one of the big challenges that everybody runs into, is where do we start, and making sure we start in the right place. Knowing what normal looks like, because this is, I think we're going to find one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is they never look at it until it's broken. And then once it's broken, and that's, you know, what it looks like broken. Using the OSI model. And I would say that, you know, this is one of those things that we've all taken to heart and that we use day in and day out as a structure for troubleshooting. How to make sure the symptom you're seeing is related to the reported problem. We don't want to get stuck on symptoms. We want to focus on problems. Having the right tools, and then validating and documenting the fix. So these are the topics we're going to be going through. Some of these we'll just be discussing. Other ones, we will be sharing our screens just kind of to show some things that we do to help get an idea of what's going on. So with that, let's start with knowing where to start your process. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Tony and Chris jump in here. As far as, you know, Chris, where do you start your process?
You know, for me, I find that even when I start working with people remotely on packet analysis stuff, because that's another service I offer. If something's broken, hey, let's work together and get it fixed, just like you guys as well. And I find people will capture an issue, send it over, pop me an email, hey, download the PCAP, and hey, Chris, what was the problem? And I'm like, whoa, okay, but well, before I go and open that PCAP and find out what's going on, I need to back up and get a bunch of information first. So we jump on a call. I got to know what's the detail about the problem, who is impacted, what applications were involved. I literally take out a piece of paper. I'm just old school. I'm just going to physically write things down so that I then have some markers to look for when I get into the PCAP. It's tempting to just nerd out right away. You jump in the PCAP and try to, you know, figure out, sort everything out, but it's just so easy to go down tangents or rabbit holes when we don't fully first get as much information about the problem. Is it intermittent? Can it be reproduced? Where are the servers? Are they in a cloud environment? Do we control that cloud environment? What capture perspectives do we have there? Is there any way we can avoid capturing directly on the VM? Can we get external to the box itself? So those are all questions that really help me once I do get into the packets. How
Right
about you,
on.
Tony?
Same as Chris. The only thing I can add is interviewing the customer and making sure you validate everything they say, because sometimes it's secondhand, sometimes they think, sometimes that's what they heard, sometimes that's what they read, you know, and then you got to try to decipher what is really going on versus what they heard was going on. I'm working on a problem right now, literally, and first thing they did, like Chris said, they got a whole bunch of trace files, and after just talking to them for a while and looking at one trace file, I kind of fell for it. And we backed up, and I'm like, I think there's something wrong with the infrastructure. So we just started running some simple trace routes, and sure enough, 140 milliseconds across their link to just the internet. And they're like, oh, is that normal? I said, well, this is what you were talking about, Mike. What is normal? You know, have you done this before? No, but it worked. Yeah, but did it work well? So then you got to pick away of, you know, what does that mean? You know, so I'm not trying to jump into the next topic, but yeah, just starting with the client and sitting down and getting them to not calm down, but just focus for a bit. And like Chris said, take notes, and then everything they've said, go back and prove and disprove, because everything they said is correct. That's easy to go back and say, yep, 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 yep. But sometimes it's like, no, that's not what that is. Well, that's what they told me. Well, okay, that's fine, but that's not what it is. You know, being response time or packet loss or whatever it happens to be. So just that whole first step with the client, that's the big deal. Because after that, if you don't get that right, then everything else is just going to be in vain, right?
Well, and I think that you know, you're right on the money there. And the number of times that, you know, we've been tempted to set up an analyzer in a wiring closet, where I tend to want to go out to the client's desk and sit down, see what they're doing. And because then you start getting a feel for, you know, we like to think everything can be solved by looking at a trace, but sometimes it's, you're going to the wrong site. You're supposed to be going to the production site or the beta site, not this site. And, you know, seeing what's going on there. And the other part is getting an idea of what they're dependent on. And I think that that's one of the places that I tend to start a lot of times, is kind of building a dependency analysis, doing a dependency analysis to say, what servers are you talking to? And because it's easy to run over this direction, but if you don't understand who they're actually dependent on, then, you know, that kind of that dependency analysis. Who are we talking to narrow that isolate that fault domain, right?
Yeah.
And then once we have that, then start really drilling in and talking.
Yeah, and to your initial point, the first thing I teach people in my troubleshooting class is get off your butt and go for a walk if you can. And you'd be surprised, right? Cable trapped in the door, cable on a heater, wrapped around an arc welder, frayed cable, right? Electrical tape wrapped around two cables that somebody tried to repair, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff, right?
Yes.
And another thing too that it just came to me as you were talking, Mike, is I try to ask my client, what visibility do they have, right? Visibility is everything, right? If you cannot see, you cannot fix what you cannot see. I mean, we're not going to go to our cars, and if there's a problem with the engine, we're blindfolded, right? So as good troubleshooters, the more accurate and the more points of visibility you have, the better. You know, and I'm saying this as I mean, good grief, my shirt says packet head. I mean, like, I'm a packet, I love doing packet stuff, but packets aren't everything all the time. Sometimes, hey, do you have a ping tool? Do you have a TCP connect kind of tool? Do you have something maybe that has been doing some type of analysis so we can watch for trends? Those points of visibility sometimes are like, the packets can steer you in a direction, but those would be the ones that help you find root cause. So
Exactly.
that's another thing that I ask. And what do we have to work with in terms of visibility?
Yep.
Yeah, and on that same note, I always try to find out what the tools are really doing versus what they think they're doing. Like Mike said, somebody claims traceroute using ICMP, or is it TCP, or, you know, how are you checking stuff? How's it set up? Is it really doing what you think it's doing? You know, and I've been in a lot of places where you got solar winds and things say they're up and they're not, right?
Right.
Or I'm going to that server and I'm using this port, and you're like,
yeah.
no,
What?
actually you're going to that server on this
server,
port.
that port. Yeah,
No,
that's
not.
right.
Yes, you are. Okay.
Well, you know, and that's a good one, Tony, as well, is when we have a centralized monitoring tool. one of the tendencies is to go look at that tool and say, hey, everything's up. And I was asked to do some consulting with a small ISP. And I said, when you tell the customer that, it's like telling them, I don't believe you that that you're actually having a problem, because I'm looking at it and there's no problem.
Right.
And so that's where, we can talk more about it when finding the right tools, but making sure that we have our instrumentation as close to the client as possible, so we're getting their experience. Because oftentimes those centralized tools, we've got those in the data center, and we're monitoring servers in the data center. And so we're not really taking all those WAN links and local networks and everything into account. So, so we have to be careful when we look at those and tell somebody, that's not the problem, or we don't see a problem. They do.
Yeah, and a lot of times that's why I'm a fan of these portable tools like HR Ping, iPerf, now Microsoft's PacketMon. They're right on the client's PC, right? Yep. And many times, if you can run these portable tools without it being blocked by Carbon Black or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you could run tools from the client, like Mike just said, that's awesome. And even using the developer tools in the browser, because people don't even know that, in Chrome, IE, all these Edge, Brave, they all have developer tools showing you response time and the waterfall reports right in the browser.
Yep.
So now it doesn't matter if it's encrypted, right? So just trying to educate people on what tools they can use is sometimes a big challenge, right?
Well, I'm going to move us along a little bit just to make sure that, and so the next part is knowing what normal looks like. So we've talked about, where do we start? Well, this is where we start before the problem occurs. And I don't hate to use the word proactive, but we need to be proactive in our troubleshooting, right? Especially for networks that we own. So that, going in and taking a look at what normal looks like is a very important thing. So I'm gonna jump in. Let me just share this real quick. Let's see. We'll grab that. And for me, one of the things I use is SmokePing, free tool. In fact, I have this running on the Raspberry Pi that's also acting as my DNS server. And so it runs on Linux, and I have a number of sites set up that I go out and ping. And we can see, if we come in here to last 10 days, we can see that, there's a spike in there. We saw some times where it was taking longer. We can also see in here what our packet loss looks like. So I can look at, my packet loss for the last 3 hours is 0.00%. Last 30 hours, 0.00%. Last 10 days, 0.15. And the last 360 days is 0.26. And I'm sure that in there somewhere, that includes some times where my router needed to be rebooted. We were talking before this got started. And so what this does is it gives me a way that I can go out and look at, Rackspace. I use Rackspace for my email, what my response time looks like to Rackspace, my Comcast head end. So I did a trace route and said, what's my first hop once I get into Comcast? So is this a local issue? Is this a problem elsewhere on the internet? And I'll tell you, when I'm running presentations like this, I always have this up because I want to see, are we seeing an increase in latency, packet loss, and so on. So this is one of those free little tools that I use, just runs in the background. And when somebody says, well, we're seeing 8% packet loss with Comcast, well, maybe that's not Comcast. Maybe it's your wireless or your router or something like that. So I'm going to stop sharing. But what are some of the things that you guys do for determining normal?
Tony, go for it.
I'll jump in first, I guess. So yeah, normal to me, I tell people normal is only that point in time because especially corporations, are there backups going on? Is it end of quarter? Is it 2 in the morning? Is it 9 a.m. when people are logging in? All those normal times are going to give you normal baselines. But the key is same tool, same methodology. That's the key. And it doesn't matter, smoke ping or just ping or HR ping or whatever you want to use. as long as you're using the same tool the right way, the same way, and recording those numbers consistently, then that'll give you a reference. We can call it a baseline or whatever. But those are just references. So if you said it's 10 milliseconds to get to google.com, and guess what? Tomorrow it's 11 milliseconds. You're going to shut down the place and figure out what's going on? Probably not. But well, some people, some people are like, oh my God, it's a millisecond. But
This is
at the end of, at the end of the day, it's just it's all context. That's what I try to explain to people. It's all context. Where are you? How you getting there, and where are you getting to? And even right now, I just did a quick ping to one of my wireless cameras outside. It's about 100 feet from the house, and it's wireless. And most of the time, it's 2 milliseconds. But every once in a while, if the camera gets pulled, it's 120 milliseconds. And if you don't know that, and you get that one number in that one point of time, you're gonna think, oh my goodness, what's going on? Let's find out. The wireless is wrecked. No, just relax. So, that to me, response time is kind of the biggest thing to do, and using the right tool, because sometimes you can't use ICMP. You got to do a port ping, right? Yep. TCP or UDP. Sometimes you don't. You capture some packets, start up your web browser, and just look at it that way, the TCP connect time or DNS. But anyways, just trying to figure out the same tools consistently for the client is kind of a big deal, right? Because that's a moving target. Chris?
Yeah, I think, to echo that, it's something I've seen a strong pivot toward us with my customers, especially over the last couple of years, has been towards cybersecurity. Hey, here's a PCAP. What's normal, Chris? Is this traffic? Am I getting hacked? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I have malware? So I think ahead of time, getting those baselines can help us to determine, hey, you're having this much traffic go to this region of the world. Your data centers are here, here, and here. What else? What else is all this spurious conversation? Or internally, Mike and Tony are talking laterally to each other. This much data is going over these kinds of ports. What are these applications? What's going on? Or is this an attacker trying to do some lateral movement within our environment? So I think with the cybersecurity conversation, baselining isn't even an option. Like, you cannot find abnormal unless you have an idea of what should be there. After that, it's just threat hunting and looking for just things that look strange. Why am I seeing a bunch of outbound data being exfiltrated over DNS, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things like that go, that doesn't look healthy. But it's best when we have a baseline traffic, even PCAPs that we can take. I try to encourage my customers, hey, any given Monday, just grab a whole day's worth of traffic and just store it somewhere. That way, if you do suspect you're being attacked, we do have a point to go back to from a capture perspective. So I think that's huge.
Well, I had somebody send me a trace file of something they thought was an attack, and it was just a poorly written app that they have.
Right.
That they never baselined. And they're like, look at this. I go, yeah, it's your app. That's the way it works.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Well,
And knowing and experience, I think, Tony, helps know the difference, which you can't just get experience overnight. It's like, I think baselines, one of the things that I like about baselines is that it helps you get experience in your own environment before there's a fire. It's the fireman analogy, right? Don't wait till the building's burning to learn how to use the hose. It's like, go out to a parking lot ahead of time, learn how to use this thing, and that can really help you during the baseline phase.
Well, that's, I go through periods where there's different tools I just totally immerse myself into. And one of them was Elasticsearch. And I had built a Elasticsearch server that took all the log messages from my routers, from everything, and looked at connections that I was allowing to be established, connections that were being rejected, and, taking a look at a macro level. So sometimes, we can get, again, buried in the packets, and looking at how do we take a look at something at such a high level that we can see trends in there, that like you brought up, Chris, we see that DNS, all of a sudden our DNS traffic has gone way up, and our DNS servers have changed. The amount of data is now going to different servers, so then that helps direct us somewhere. But what really, it comes down to what changed, right? Isn't that what we, what changed? And I love it when you ask somebody, what did you change? Nothing. What did you change? Takes about 3 times. What did you change? Well, you always get the
well, everything,
but it
but really
shouldn't
nothing.
have had any impact on what was going on. And so if we don't have that baseline, if we don't have that what does normal look like? It makes it hard to figure out what changed.
Yeah, and to that point, Mike, how many of times have all of us made a change and there was something we didn't expect to happen, right? So we've tried to make it a practice to have a pre-change data, make change, and then post-change collect
Validate.
data. So we have a basis. Because I mean, all of us have messed up royally, at certain times, and so. But I think the
No.
more you dig into your mistakes, the better you can understand what happened.
Well, having come from a mainframe environment where we had to put in change control, I learned very quickly, never say this is a zero impact change. I would
Right.
always say, this thing is going to destroy everything. And there was never a problem. You put in zero impact, you're
Oh yeah.
toast. It's going to
Yeah.
take everything down.
Yeah, you just jinxed yourself.
All right. So using the OSI model to troubleshoot problems. So, we talk about the OSI model. I know every time in a class that I would bring this up, eyes roll, oh, OSI
Well,
model.
I'm one of them.
Yep. But I think that one thing that I can confidently say about at least the three of us is we've taken this to heart, and
Mhm.
we've used this as a structure and I think of it as a way to eliminate 6 places I don't have to look.
Yep.
I mean, we can scratch off, 6 of them, boom, 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 and get to that one. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the presentership over to you, Chris. And
Great.
I think you've got something to say about this.
Big tip, don't
Sure.
start at the top
Yeah.
of the model, start at the bottom.
Yeah, no, that's actually a common thing that we hear, isn't it? Start at the bottom, work up. Depending on our perspective, if I'm a code developer, I'm going to start at the top, work down, or I'm
Yep.
just going to start at the top and then go to the edge of my experience and then blame the network,
Yep.
right? So, but a lot of times, network gets blamed, network's slow, that network thing. We hear that from even non-technical people. So, I think for me, kind of subconsciously, I didn't think about it like I'm going to start at this level all the time. But as a practice, my workflow has been I just start at the transport layer, which cuts the OSI model in half. And if I see problems there, then I can go down to the network. Like, for example, if I see retransmissions or out of orders or dupacks, then I know, okay, I can go down and look at the network. If I'm seeing retransmissions with TCP, then that means packets are being lost. Let's go figure out where.
Mhm.
But if I see something like I'm about to show you guys, let me know if you see me.
Yep.
You weren't going to get very far without just pulling up a Wireshark trace, everybody. So here we go.
Yippee.
And I'm just going to show you what my eyes do with this. So this was an example of, okay, classic slow application. We go to a tab on an application and we're sitting here waiting with a spinny wheel white page, and then all of a sudden, boom, page pops. Now we can actually work. I asked the customer, because how long is this thing taking to populate, to load? Oh, about 90 seconds or so, or sometimes it's a little less, a little more. I'm like, you're really waiting for 90 seconds on a white page before you keep going? Yeah, we don't have any other choice. Otherwise, it's shut down and then just it does it again. Okay, what have you done to fix it? Oh, we've already replaced the Wi-Fi, a few switches, this kind of stuff. All right, so next time call me before you do that, because I like more money, because you can just give that money to me. But anyways, I'm joking, of course. But anyway, so we pull up a PCAP, and let me just talk about what my eyes do and why I'm passionate about starting at the transport layer. I'm able to filter on a single thread as much as possible, try to find the conversation between client server. And here, just in my handshake alone, like I can see here's a SYN comes back 97 milliseconds. That gives me a context of my network round trip time. We're capturing client side. Okay, SYN goes out, SYN comes back 97. Right now, that is now a burned in my brain number that's probably about the minimum round trip time between these two endpoints. I can also come down just as a little, come on, I'm a nerd. I'm not, well, I'm with them too, so you guys understand. Time to live is 111. That gives me a context in how far away the server was. This is 17 hops away, probably started at 128. It decremented by 1 on its way back to me. So for more information on that, go to YouTube, Google it. You'll probably find some cool stuff. Anyway, so SYN comes back. Now I have a bit of a context between client and server. Okay, final act from client, cool. HTTP goes out, here's a segment, here's a fully populated segment, 1460, and then some residual after it. Now, at this point, by packet 5, I'm sitting here and I'm 104 milliseconds into the PCAP. This request goes out. 106 milliseconds later, I get an ACK. Wireshark's telling me with this check mark, we're good to 5. My stuff got there. My request made it to the server, and the server from the TCP level is happy. TCP took this request, sent it upstairs to the application, and now I'm sitting here on hold music. At this point, packet 6, that's not why the person called me. It's not screen punching slow just yet. 45 seconds. Now we're starting to get into a bit of a symptom they probably called me for. But let's actually see what's happening. 45 seconds, who initiates? Well, client to server. Segment length is 1. What happens, client waited so long that it was like, hey server, right, so we're chatting, but if we're not talking anymore, I gotta kind of shut this thing down, or we gotta keep this thing alive in case you are still busy, so just hit me back in case you disappeared off the planet. The server comes back 100 milliseconds, which is about my network round trip time. Yep, I'm still here. Client's like, yo, cool. About that request. So, okay, all right, you're still working on it. Good. All right, so 45 seconds later, again, another keep alive. Server comes back. Yep, I'm here, man. We're good. We're talking. It wasn't until 18 seconds after the second set of keep alive did we get a response. And in fact, I can come down into Wireshark. If I go down to the HTTP area, I have this time since request. You just throw that up there as a column. This time since request, 108 full seconds between request and response. That's how long they waited. That's also a value I can filter for. So if I take a look time since request in the low left, http.time, I can come up here and I can go http.time is greater than, let's just say 2 seconds. This shows me the amount of time these guys were waiting for responses. So, okay, well, what does this have to do with the OSI model, Chris? Well, I'll tell you, I didn't see any retransmissions. There was no packet loss. What the client sent got there. I didn't see a big shift in latency. It's not like handshake response time was 100 milliseconds and then ACK time was 500 milliseconds, right? That would start to tell me a little bit more about the network. ACK time was almost exactly 100 milliseconds. So right there within 10 packets, I'm able to exonerate the client. He's not tripping, he's doing okay. The network itself is delivering the data and doing so reliably and in pretty consistent latency. What on earth is that server doing for 108 full seconds? So I used the transport layer to exonerate the network, and that let me look up at the application and put the blame at least in the right domain. Back to what you were saying, Mike, about perspective. From the client perspective, I wasn't able to tell a whole lot more from this PCAP. We had to move server side and do some further analysis. But again, within 10 packets, you at least have your problem domain, which is a big deal when you're troubleshooting.
Mm-hmm.
So back to Tony, maybe.
I don't know what about the trace.
About the OSI model,
Oh,
where you
I
start.
thought you want me to comment on your trace. I'm like, you nailed it. What do you want me to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, you could have, yeah, you can add any other detail if you want to.
Yeah, that's and you know what? It's funny how as Chris is talking and Mike's talking and I'm thinking about what I do, a lot of the stuff that we do is just, I think it's just inherent. It's just like a reflex, and it's hard sometimes to verbalize the way you do things. And I also think it depends on the kind of problem you're on. So if for example you have a wireless connection between two sites, then yeah, you'd want to look at the RF side of it. And Chris is right. He's looking at this trace and he zeroed in on the transport layer to kind of eliminate half the things he would look for. But just everyday stuff, when I'm talking to people, I'm still surprised how many times we look at a switch and you look at a port and there's a boatload of CRC errors, right? And I think part of the issue is it works, but it doesn't work well. And that's when we talk to customers, right? And they say, yeah, it's slow, but I pinged it and it's there. I said, yeah, you didn't say it was down. You said it was slow. Yeah, but I pinged it. Yeah, but that's like one ping every second. That's like a lifetime in the network world. So I try to, just to kind of add to what Chris said, I try to just step back and again interview the client. But if they have not recently gone and looked at physical level errors on their fiber, on their copper, even on the RF side, like, how long does it take for you to get on Wi-Fi? Because now, believe it or not, and I'm sure you guys have heard this before, people are working from home, and now all of a sudden there's all these issues. People complain about work response time, and it could be their Wi-Fi at home, right?
Yep.
And sure enough, some guy's trying to do his webcast, and his son's watching Netflix, and the other guy's downloading something, and the wife is doing her stream, and they only have 20 meg at the house, and they're just slamming the link, right? And sure, yeah, you can ping something, right? It's not what they're saying. So I think there's always that contextual part of the question where you have to ask people, what are you doing? I'm on my network. No, is it cabled? Is it wireless? And even out here in the country, we set up wireless to people's homes. So they might be cabled into a switch, which is cabled into a router, but eventually has an LTE link or a 5 gig or a 2.4 gig link, but it's wireless. So, you may just say, yeah, it's all cabled. Yeah, you think it's cable to what you can see to your DMARC, but after that, what is it? Is it fiber? Is it cable? Is it wireless? But I still now, to this very day, I'm finding myself going back to the client. And as Mike said, what tools do you have in place? What are you monitoring? And can we just literally manually go to your switch and do a show interface? And my big tip off, my red flag is when somebody goes there and it says cleared never for the counters. I'm like, well, how long has this thing been up? 3 months, 2 years, whatever. Like, well, how long have you been working on this problem? For, a couple of weeks. Well, you ever clear the counter? No. Well, I don't know if all those errors happened a millisecond 2 months ago,
Right.
or is it every day? Is it every hour? So can we, and I just did that this morning. I just emailed this customer I'm working with. I said, what monitoring tools do you have in place to look at layer 1? Just to make sure it's not there, because it could be now load balancing comes into play, or multiple routes, or whatever. It just seems the complexity's gone up, and people tend to jump ahead sometimes and miss something. And if you don't have the eye, like Chris said, you don't have the experience in the eye to jump a layer, you're going to miss something. And I can't tell you how many times I find the problems at layer 1 still, right?
So Tony, you are right into how do you make sure the symptom you're seeing is related to the reported problem, right?
Good job, Tony.
And so, but I mean, I think, that ties in with, just like you brought up physical layer. And that's why I wholeheartedly agree with Chris's approach on the OSI model. I'm a binary search guy, right?
Yeah.
I start in the middle and I do an iPerf. I do a throughput test. And if I'm getting good throughput, then we move up, right? Or if you see that you're getting a TCP ACK right after you sent that packet, taking into account the round trip delay, then that isn't your problem. So let's scratch those bottom 4 layers off. And then if we got the IP address, DNS is probably working. So let's get rid of that session layer. And so now nobody cares about the presentation layer. So now we're up into the application layer, right? But with the symptom, I think about, I was working on a problem for a hospital where they had a software program for tracing our patient movement. And we saw some packets that were being lost, and it caused problems with that. And they said, well, it's got to be the app, it's got to be this. Well, it turned out that we looked at the switch, and there were massive numbers of CRC errors for those PCs. So I said, why are these set to full duplex? Well, the vendor said that full duplex is what we needed to use. I said, okay, why is the PC set to auto? Well,
Oops.
we replaced the PC and we forgot that we set that to full duplex. So here, all of these PCs, and they were using multicasts, which aren't getting retransmitted, right? So they would send out a multicast, and if it was receiving data at the same time, it would chuck that packet, and that was gone forever. And so we had to go back. And so that goes kind of back to the baselining too of what do your error counters look like? Going out there and preventing those problems. You brought up firefighter, Chris. For years I've been talking about, the fire marshal versus the firefighter. I spent 5 years as a volunteer firefighter. People loved us to show up and squirt water in their house. It was very odd. But they hated the fire marshal because that dude shows up and make sure the fire doesn't start in the first place. So, sometimes the symptom that we see is a indicator of potentially a much larger underlying problem that's affecting more than what is even being brought up, right? Because how do you know what fast is until you really get rid of those underlying problems? We got rid of a lot of those CRC errors, and people were calling. And you know what kind of speed increase you need to see for someone to call and say, things seem a lot faster.
Right.
It's like if you get a 10% lag, you get a call, it's slow. You get 1,000% increase in speed, and they might call and say, hey, it seems like things are faster. We actually got calls because we fixed this underlying problem that had been going on for quite some time.
And I think to that point, Mike, if I could add something, and I'm not sure if this goes with the previous slide or the one we're on, but I think something the three of us have had to develop is it's that ability to know what to not, or what we can get out of the way, how we can quickly exonerate the network, exonerate layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. It's like, no, it's not that, it's not that, that's not that. And a newcomer might go, whoa, how did you know it wasn't that? Right? How do I know what's not involved? Right?
Yep.
And especially with PCAPs, like you're looking through traffic. Oh, your ARPs look healthy. Don't worry about that ICMP. Oh, that little error, that's just okay. Especially like with TCP, all those black lines and red letters, it's like, oh, don't worry about that one. A dupack, all right. But honing in on the stuff. But I know a lot of people feel, and I hear this in my classes, like, how do I know what not to worry about? And I think the thing that I share with them, and it's ironic I'm here with you two guys, is, as I say, you have to know the fundamentals well. You have to know, how does TCP work? What is that
Right.
ICMP message telling you? How does ARP work? How do you know if that's normal, healthy ARP activity, or if we have something that looks weird? We know how it should work. It is back to the basics. We know
Yep.
the basics and how this thing should work. And the reason why I said it's ironic is because I remember early in my career, I think I sat with both of you guys at separate times on airplanes. Mike, I distinctly remember, we were flying back from Interop or something, and I think I picked your brain for 2 good hours on the TCP window. And and I finally got it, and I was like, I get it. I get how a receive window works and how it advertises that. But it's that curiosity, like, I'm not gonna let this go until I understand how this works in a normal environment. And that way, when it is broken, when it is part of a symptom that's leading to root cause, you can get faster at identifying it. So the takeaway for anyone new or getting into networking, or if you're trying to become a better engineer, just keep it back to those fundamentals and know how these things work well. Then you'll be able to better understand when they don't.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between knowing and memorizing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I remember I had a class where two of the students were arguing about TCP, and neither one of them were right. And so I let them go on for a while. But it's like, neither one of you really have any idea what you're talking about. But
Yeah,
let's
but if
take
you're
a look.
louder, you're more correct.
That's yes, Tony. But yeah, and so that's where I think one of the things that I think I can say for all three of us that we found is, let's grab a capture. Let's see what's going on. Let's see what's really happening. And I remember, back in the mid 90s when I got started in this, I had Stevens TCP TCP illustrated book in one hand, and I had there you go, right there.
Doesn't have
And
it.
I had
Does this thing ever leave my desk? No.
and I had my network general sniffer in the other. And I would read that this is what's supposed to happen, and I would look at the packets and see that's what's happening. And like you brought up, Chris, I have a filter I call, my big knot. And it is not TC, it's not port 80, port 443, port 53. And it's all the traffic I expect to see. And so one of the things I'll do is I'll put that filter in there, and let's get rid of the things that we know are normal. And I think that that is another piece when it comes to analysis, whether it is with a trace or anything else, and that is clearing out, kind of trying to find the needle in the haystack sometimes involves just burning the haystack down.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Or
we've
making
got
it
to get
smaller.
rid of all
Yeah.
the stuff that we don't care about. And then the thing that we're looking for just falls right out because we've gotten rid of everything else.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Chris nailed this one earlier. If you don't have the experience, you won't know what to get rid of. And last week, somebody had a trace they sent me, and we were going through it together. And he said, look, I just did a trace, and I'm filtered out DNS and HTTP because that's what I want to focus on. And he's got a problem. And I said, well, if you have a problem, there might be an ICMP error message coming back. And he goes, well, I didn't ping anything. I said, well, no, it's not just for pings, right? So we
Yep.
just changed the filter to include ICMP, and bang, there it was. There was a redirect, and there was a fragmentation required, but don't fragment was set. And I said, well, that's good to know. And then the guy's like, I totally missed that. I go, well, no, you were on the right track. You just never thought to look for that last piece, right?
Yep.
And to that point, Tony, that's also why in my classes I often discourage capture filters in the beginning.
Yeah,
Yep.
Like
same
if
here.
people run in and they go, well, capture only TCP, go.
Yeah.
And you're like, great. So we just missed DHCP, we missed DNS, we missed any ICMP response, we missed any ARP traffic or spanning tree. We just chose to not look at a big symptom, and something that can help us to get through cause. So I'm not saying never use them because, okay, once we have a better feel for things, we can start to use capture filters, but just not from the get-go. So that might be a tip for the audience. Just when you first start looking at a thing, try capture
I did
everything and then
Europe one year.
whittle it
I
down.
was doing a presentation and the website was slow. And so I set a filter on my IP address and we did a capture, went to the website, didn't get anything.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm really quickly trying to, what could have gone wrong so that, I wouldn't be behind the audience. But I said, what do you think happened? Nobody really. So answered. So I went back and captured it with no filter and we had IPv6 running. And so by setting my IPv4 address, I eliminated all the IPv6 traffic that could have been going on. All right, so we're going to move on to having the right tools. And so let me bring this up. And Tony, you sent me this slide, and this is we see that we've got all these things in our network. And before I let Tony start talking here, if you have any questions, we've got a few more things that we're going to talk about. We want to make sure that if you have any questions that we address those. So there is a question section there in GoToMeeting. Please be sure to take a moment and put questions in for us if you want. It's all yours, Tony.
All right. So this slide I made years ago because I got tired of people just drawing a cloud and a line and saying, yeah, it goes in there. And I said, yeah, but that cloud could be another site. It could be anything, and it's made up a bunch of stuff. So to get an appreciation for like what is the network, it's not just a pretty fluffy cloud. I kind of just did this big kind of expanded view of a network. And if you just start from the client on the left-hand side, I can't tell you how many times I go to a corporation and they got issues with a client and they're plugged in and they're really on Wi-Fi and they're connected to an access point on the furthest part of the network. And they're wondering why it's slow. And, and their VPN kicked in at the same time automatically. So they didn't even realize that they were coming out externally and back internally. And then you've got cabling issues. Poor guy slamming into the back of his jack and it's all mangled, or he's running it over it with his chair, or the pins have kind of got pulled out a bit as he pulled the jacket on the cable. And then of course you've got, patch panels. You've got everything that you can think of that could possibly go wrong. But the big thing is, to tie into what Mike was getting at, is do people have tools at all these various layers to just troubleshoot? You don't have to certify cabling to the nth degree. You just want to know, hey, are all the pins plugged in? Is the cable got an issue? And I find that more and more often the answer is, we don't do cabling, we have a contractor. I said, well, that's great, but you need to troubleshoot at some point, because, and this is a catch-22, people can't troubleshoot because they're waiting for the contractor to come back to test the jack or test the cable. And that just prolongs the whole troubleshooting process when you need to do something basic. So you've got obviously copper cable, so you need a tester for that. You've got fiber, you've got Wi-Fi, the RF, right? The
Yep.
radio, just the whole RF band, because you've got Bluetooth, microwave, intercoms, all sorts of stuff that could cause interference and noise at that layer. And trust me, running a Wi-Fi scanner to see what access points out there is not the same as an RF scanner, right? They're two totally different tools. And conversely, capturing packets does not help troubleshoot a cabling issue.
No.
So I find just getting people on the same page when we sit down and talk about A, their environment, and B, what tools they have is kind of a big deal. Because at the end of the day, guess what? You go down that wrong road and it takes a long time to turn around and come back, right? So, you look at your switch, how people monitoring their switches, and just manually going into CLI is not a great plan, right? Having
Yep.
anything, even MRTG, like anything to monitor port usage, port errors, anything is going to help. And even with MRTG, you can go a step further and monitor the temperature of the device if you'd like, right? And if you have PoE, what's that looking like? So there's a lot of different things to keep in mind as you go through this. But as Chris eloquently said earlier, if you don't see any retransmissions and you don't see anything getting dropped, chances are layer one's okay. And I agree with that 100%. But at the same token, when I walk into some place, I like to make sure they have something in place and that they are looking at it, because that's the other fear I have. I walked into a place, they have SolarWinds running, nobody looks at it. And oh, look, there's a whole bunch of errors in the log in SolarWinds saying that there's a high retransmission rate, there's a high packet loss rate. Yeah, we don't look at that. Why not? Oh, because there's too much stuff in there. Yeah, because you didn't fix it. Right? That's why. Like it's telling you there is something wrong and you need to address it. Yeah, nobody called yet. Yet. Is that what you're waiting for? The yet part? Because that's not a good plan. So obviously we got switches, and switches get complicated because switches layer 2 or 3 if it's routing. And some now are even doing some built-in firewall kind of stuff with it. So now we're getting up to 3, 4, and so on and so on. We have load balancers on networks. You have all sorts of stuff to consider. And the big trick, everything you see on this map, is trying to overlay it on the OSI model. What thing belongs at what layer? And then at every layer, I try to make an extra box called tools. Layer 1, what have you got for tools? Copper, fiber, RF, right? Layer 2, da 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 da. Layer 3, da 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 da. And there's tons of free stuff out there, and you don't just get it because it's free. You get it because you have a need for it. Right? And the only important thing I can talk about with tools, just as a closing comment, is you walk into like my garage or Mike's garage or Chris's garage, we all have tools. We got drills, we got saws, we got all sorts of tools. Are they all plugged in and running 724 just because we got them? No, probably not, right? So you grab a tool for a specific reason when you need it. But to Chris's point, you don't want to try to figure out how to use a tool in the middle of a firefight. You want to make sure you've at least tried it, know the behavior, try to find out what it's reporting, how it's reporting, and when it reports an error, what does that mean? So that requires spending a little bit of time. Like Mike says, he immerses himself with the tools. You got to put some time aside, and you got to say, okay, here's my cable tester, here's my link runner, my Etherscope, my whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. What happens when that port is down? What happens when that cable's messed up? What happens when the internet is slow? Like, what is it telling me? And all the tools will give you a different message for the exact same problem. So if you can't decode that, then you're going to be behind the 8 ball.
Well, and it's funny. The number of times I've gone into companies to do training on tools and said, so where is your, whatever it is we're training on? Oh, it's sitting in this drawer over here. And it's like, They say, what is it that you want us to get out of this training? Not to leave that in that drawer.
Yep.
Right? Plug it in. You're not going to wear this stuff out. I've
Yep.
had analyzers plugged in for years. You are not going to wear it out. You're not going to, you're not going to damage it. You can drop it and stuff. But I get this feeling, I've seen over the years, I've fallen into it myself, that people are doing their companies a favor by only using free tools or trying to save money. And in the end, there's a bigger picture, and that is, what is that outage costing? And so I remember going into one plant where they had a man lift just kind of sitting there in the corner, and a little barrier around it. And I said, what's that for? And they said, if the conveyor gets stuck, if something gets stuck up on that conveyor, that costs us X number of dollars per minute. So we bought this man lift and it sits there. We don't use it for anything else. In fact, if everything is good, we never use that man lift. But when this problem occurs, we absolutely have to have that man lift here to go fix that problem as fast as we can. We can't wait to rent one or something like that. And so it's, you know, it's having those tools and an understanding of how to use those tools that is so important. And like you brought up, Tony, with the OSI model, going through and things like PoE. PoE is one where it's pretty tough to find a free tool because we're talking about hardware and cable testing, that we need to have something that physical. You know, as you move up in the layers, Nmap, great tool, Wireshark, iPerf, Cacti, Smoke Ping. I mean, we've got all these tools that the built-in ones in various operating systems. But there are some things where capturing at full line rate, doing things like that, tapping in and getting in the path of the packets, we just can't, there isn't a free option always. So use those free tools, but there's a steep learning curve to the free tools as well. And that's something that, if you leave, what are you leaving behind? And are you leaving the organization better because of the decisions you made as far as the tools that you've acquired and taught others how to use?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tony, go for it.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say just what you just said, Mike, about the learning curve. Boy, I took a cybersecurity certification a couple months ago, and I had to learn like 50 new tools, and just even more so on the cyber side, all the different tools, Metasploit, GoBuster, you just name it. And I think what we've all found is that there's not one tool that does everything. Mm-hmm. You got to have a bit of a tool suite. So for those newcomers, if you can get a tool that does a solid ping over time and can get you response time like a graph, almost like the one that Mike showed. I often speak well of our wonderful sponsor here, NetAlly, because it's like, oh man, at this point, I need something on the wireless side. I need to be able to check the wireless environment to be able to see who's connected, what radios are around here, because I just can't do that with a free tool with a copy of Wireshark on a laptop, right? Mm-hmm. I need a tool that has that RF perspective. So if I have a good Wi-Fi environment, something that can do ping reliably well and TCP connectivity, if I have a tool that can get me some SNMP statistics, so I can use the network's visibility, like pull the switches and routers, net flow. So now I don't have to dig back through several terabytes of PCAPs and try to figure out conversation matrix over a 8-hour day. And then that packet capture, not just the ability to look at a PCAP with Wireshark or whatever tool, but be able to capture it well from the hardware. I mean, if we can cover those basic silos, you're going to have most of what you need for most network problems. There's absolutely going to be one-offs, absolutely. But the majority of the problems that you're looking at, you'll be able to get most of the visibility you need.
Yeah, and just to add to all that, I think the last few jobs I've had, I spent more time updating their tools and training them how to use them because the guy who ordered them isn't there anymore. Or, the reason why they bought them, that whole issue's gone now. So it just sat in the box. And what I've got in the habit now, and I just did it for customers a few months ago, made a little pamphlet, how to get started with their tool in their environment, because every environment's a little different, right? So how do you plug it in? How do you get an IP and how do you connect to it? And then here's 5 things you can do under a minute for baselining, right? And if you see that, like Mike said, maybe they're more inclined to use it more often. But I find that this whole knowledge transfer doesn't exist, which is funny because we have more technology today to do a video, to do a write-up, to do anything on how to show people how to do something. It's easier now than it ever was. But for some reason, people don't seem to do that. They don't think of it. The most common answer is I don't have time. I say it takes more time for you to figure it out from scratch than it does for you to simply document how to use it for the next guy, right? And the last contract I had, that's what we did. every month or two, we have our staff meetings, and I would show them a tool. I'd say, guys, here's what we're doing. Here's when you use it. Here's how. Here's the box it's in. Here's the cabinet it's in. And here's a quick start on how to use it. And I just spend a few minutes and like, oh, that's not too bad. Right. Now, they're not an expert, but at least they can plug it in and get some data. Right.
And if I can pivot off that for a second, Tony, I know we're coming up to the end of the webinar. I think that's what the three of us have been really passionate about with our online presence, if you will. We know there's not a lot of knowledge transfer that happens for people that are emerging into the industry or just want to learn more about analysis and troubleshooting. All three of us have YouTube channels where we do just what Tony said. Here's how this aspect of this thing works. Here's how you use this type of tool. So there are resources out there, ones that we even use ourselves. So now more than ever, there's information out there. We just have to look for it.
Yep.
So I'm going to move on to the last one real quick, and that's validating and documenting the fix, because the S word, we have to be careful of that, and that should,
Good.
right? And, you know, we say, well, that should fix it. So what I want to do is just show really quickly, because, well, what a great opportunity to show off the Etherscope NXG here. We'll grab that and bring that up on the screen. I've got my Etherscope. Let's switch over here. There it is, sitting there on the bench. And so we'll come over here, and I can come in and run a test real quick. And one of the things that is expected of all of us when we go out and do a job is to identify what the problem is, but then be able to show that that problem that we identified was fixed. So, you know, in this case, I come in and I see that, you know, I'm able to get a gig connection, I get an IP address, but down here, SMTP isn't working. Now, the neat thing with a tool like the Etherscope and so on is that when my test is done, those results are being uploaded to localize. And so localize is giving me a snapshot of what was wrong. So now when I go in and document the problem, I can say, well, SMTP wasn't working. Now, in this case, you know, I can come in and I can say, well, I want to do a path analysis, right? So I can do a path analysis to that server. And here it says protocol ping. Well, we're not using ping to do our email. We are using TCP. So I'm just going to switch this over real quick, and I'm going to say use TCP. And if I've got TCP, I've got to give it a port. We're using port 25 in this case. So I'm going to say OK. We'll come back, and we'll go ahead and start that. So let's take a look at that path, how we're getting to our email server. So I can see that I come out of my Etherscope NXG into my PoE switch, into my core switch, into my core, into my router, and then it stops. So I'm going to stop that path analysis right now because I've kind of seen enough, and that is it gets to my main router and it doesn't get any further. Well, I kind of expect it will get further. Now, I could switch to ICMP just to see if pings make it through, which I'll tell you they would. If I come over and look at my firewall, I see somebody has put a filter on port 25. So I'm going to disable that filter, and we're going to run that path analysis again. Now, as we come up, we see we get to our router, and now we are getting beyond our router. In fact, we are getting all the way out there to our email server. So that's what we want to see. So now I could save that path analysis, but more importantly, I can come back here, I can rerun my auto test, and we're going to see if we get all the connectivity that we expect. And if we go back to the beginning of the presentation, we say, well, if we know what dependencies we have, and we're able to show that we can get to all of our dependencies, now I can go back and say, well, we fixed that problem, and we're able to get the connectivity. We're not going to see our red number 1 up here. That's good. So now we have that connectivity. We got to SMTP, and all is good in the world. So being able to go in and document what we've done, so we can show that I had a client one time that said, hey, you can hang out fixing problems here as long as you want. We just want a write-up. Every time you find something, fix it and show that it was fixed. And at the end of every week, I'd give them a stack of these little write-ups I did of here's something I found, here's the impact it was having, here's what I did to fix it, and here's proof that it was fixed. All right, well, we're at 10 o'clock, or at 10 o'clock Pacific time, I think. A little bit later there for you, Tony.
Yep.
So I want to thank everyone for joining on with us. I had fun. I don't get I mean I don't get an opportunity to sit down and talk with you guys like this very often. So
This has been great. So
this
thanks to
was fun.
NetAlly for bringing us together, and hope that everyone took some points away that they can use.
All right. Well, I think this has been recorded, and I'm sure a recorded version will be up there somewhere. So if you want to go back and watch us over and over again, you certainly can, or refer
I
us to
will.
And we encourage everybody to reach out on social media. Find us on Twitter, find us on LinkedIn, find us on YouTube. If you have further questions, any one of the three of us would be happy to help you, especially getting started down this path. That's what we're all here for. So don't hesitate to reach out. And thanks for watching today.
All right.